Thank you, Kelechi. Thank you, MJ, University of Maryland, and thank you all for showing up and allowing me the opportunity to share with you some thoughts on the ethical issues that different stakeholders along the whole publishing process encounter. And I deal with them on a daily basis with all these stakeholders in my capacity, as Kelechi said, publisher of the environmental science journals, which comprise about 30 journals in all interdisciplinary fields of environmental science and ecology. So, what does this publishing cycle look like? Basically, it all starts, I would say, with the submission of manuscripts. So the authors are at the very start of that cycle. They're our first stakeholder group. When the editors, basically at the very core of the publishing cycle, and from minute one to the very last minute involved in all the aspects of publishing, deem such a manuscript feasible for entering the peer review, we look at our next group of stakeholders, the reviewers. Be it in a slightly different capacity as authors, it's basically the same community, and I think Steve pointed this out rightly as well. You may find, by the way, that there will be some overlap with what was previously said. I do have no intention whatsoever of duplication. I wouldn't dare in this setting, or with our legal counsel being present here, but that's the risk. There you have it, there you have it. And like the editors, the publishers also play a role at the very core of this publishing cycle. Say that a manuscript has been accepted for publication. It then goes into the editorial and production issues for which we as publishers bear responsibility. I will not go into too much detail on that part of it. Basically, of course, I think there's also ethical norms to be kept in the production side, but at least I am not too familiar with too many cases on that end. And then finally, the publication and dissemination of the submitted articles. Starting at the very beginning of the cycle, the authors. We've heard also today a little bit that there is really a lot of pressure on authors to publish these days, and that they have limited time, and this pressure only seems to be increasing for various reasons. Publish or perish is a paradigm that you may all be familiar with. I'd like to share with you some survey results of a survey that we rendered in 2005 and 2010 respectively, asking researchers for their personal objectives to write scientific articles and to submit them to peer-reviewed papers. And I'm glad to see, and this is no surprise, that the vast majority writes scientific articles to enhance science, to share their knowledge with the community, and to disseminate results and scientific findings. What I find the most interesting bar, however, on this sheet is on the far right, where you see that a 10% increase of individuals who provided an important objective for their publication to secure funding for future research projects. I think that's a significant increase over 5 years. And this emphasizes what also Steve brought up earlier, that academic research is or has become a real business. And the link with financial issues directly related with publications is increasing, be it on a quite personal level, in order to get your tenure. Your assessment will definitely include the number of publications in what journals, reputable journals, the number of citations, and also on a broader level. When research grants are being assessed, proposals for research grants, they do look more and more at the citation behavior and the publications. So in that environment, yes, the pressure to publish is becoming even more prominent. But in such an environment, although one can imagine that publishing ethics and ethical behavior may also be under pressure, please always bear ethical norms in mind, because publish or perish might well become publish and perish. There may be more or less severe sanctions in breaking these ethical rules. And these research ethics directly related to the ethics of publishing are not new. They've been around for ages, for centuries even. And it's not only at the very start of a career that you are at risk of violating them, but also when you have gained some reputation already. So at every stage in your career, you should always bear in mind that it matters. To give you a quick example, Isaac Newton, I wouldn't dare doubting his contributions to the scientific world, but he himself had been the subject of serious allegations of research fraud, of altering data. And some 300 centuries ago, that was basically one of the main reasons of the founder of the first academic journal, Henry van Oldenburg, Philosophical Transactions for the Royal Society, to launch that journal and to make science more transparent, to make people aware of science being performed and to validate those data and to have an open and transparent discussion. These rules, these ethical rules, and I think that's also important to notice, there may be different perceptions on these in different countries, in different cultures, but in principle it's a universal language. Like the language of science itself, the language of scientific ethics is a global Esperanto and not ruled by any national cultures. And as also heard today, the problems with ethical issues are on the rise globally. We see it more and more. There are different explanations for that. I will not go too much detail into those. One could say that the output, the scientific output itself is increasing rapidly. More and more is being published. So inherently, you'll also see in absolute numbers an increase of ethical issues. One could also say that a greater awareness is being given now. It's more on the agenda of many people. Being here today is just one example. COPE being established. So it could also well be that ethical problems are being discovered more and being brought under to the right attention more and more. How big is that problem then? We've seen the tip of the iceberg, but we see more than that. We're seeing the iceberg already. We see a lot of data and a lot of ethical issues. In 2008, two individuals, Erami and Garner, published an article in Nature in which they made a well-informed estimate that up to 200,000 articles of the 17 million articles in Medline may be duplicates, may be plagiarized. And they are the people behind the Deja Vu database. I'm not sure if you are familiar with that. And in 2009, that database, the database is basically provides an overview of articles in Medline which have significant overlap. That doesn't necessarily mean that it is plagiarized or that it is a duplicate, but at least it is a matter of concern to note that no fewer than 75,000 articles in 2009 had significant overlap in that database. So based on that, I think it's not the tip of the iceberg, but much more underneath it that we can expect. Back to the beginning of the publishing cycle. We've said quite a lot of authorship already, and basically it comes down, I agree with Mark that we should see if the current definitions and norms are still valid, and if there might be some nuances to that definition. But it comes down to contributing one way or another to the research underlying the article and then to the article itself. Most of the author's duties that we've seen and that we see on various websites are commonly shared, quite obvious duties and ethical responsibilities. The most obvious one, I would think, is originality. You make sure that you don't plagiarize, that you don't take other people's work and present it as your own. But also, of course, the fundamental errors should be avoided, no fraud whatsoever. I agree with Steve, however, that most, while most may be obvious, there's a lot of grey areas that could not be easily captured under one of these items listed here. And I'd like to demonstrate that with a concrete case. Recently, we published an article in Agricultural Water Management. Soon after its publications, a lot of complaints came in from all around the world, and they all referred to a label to the map in the article. There was a picture of a map in an article, and it said Historical Palestine. And the complaints were that should be Israel. And those complaints were sometimes politically motivated, sometimes geographically, academically motivated, but they were many and from all over the world with a lot of motivation around those. So the editors and the publisher then started to look into this, what has happened here and why the complaints. What happened was the following. The authors submitted an article to this journal, a manuscript, and the editor, the handling editor, assessed it and said, well, in principle, this might be of interest to the journal. It fits the aims and scope, and the concept that they're writing about is interesting, but a lot of work needs to be done to enhance it and to make the article really acceptable and meet the quality norms of our journal. He sent it out for review, and as expected, got back these independent comments from reviewers as well. Major revisions were necessary. The editor went back to the authors and guided them through this process, really indicated where the article would be improved, and he absolutely provided any advice he could give and help in enhancing that article. Then the authors sent in their revised manuscript, and indeed it had, according to the reviewers, been improved significantly. It was almost ready to be accepted. Some minor revisions were necessary, so a second round of revision was necessary, but we're getting there. And then apparently, in that second round of revision, while the whole process had been transparent, the editors had guided the authors through those enhancements of the articles, they had changed the label under the map, because the map was initially submitted as Israel. They had changed it in a second revision to Historical Palestine. That is quite a politically sensitive issue, but that's not the main case about why this is so an important case. They did not inform the editors or the reviewers or the publisher of this change. And while all the other listed author duties that we saw previously can be well defined, in the end, I think they all fall under the umbrella of scientific trust and integrity. And by not informing the editor of a change so significant and so politically sensitive in that article, I think you break a very, if not rule of politeness, of ethical behavior within the publishing process. And that was the reason given also for this retraction. Literally that the authors have not lived up to the standards of trust and integrity that form the foundation of the peer review process. A grey area, I would say. I mean, it's no plagiarism, it's simply not sticking to fair play. What does a retraction look like? Because this article was retracted from Science Direct. As Mark pointed out, the reason is always given, and we try to be as clear as possible in that reason. This is a different retraction, and as you can see, this retraction was clearly for plagiarism. The article, the retracted article, stays online on our electronic platform, Science Direct. This is not so much to name and shame the authors, but there are also technical reasons behind this. Because you can imagine, as soon as an article is published, it can get cited. And those citations can mess up the whole system, indexing services, abstracting services, but also the community, if they then look up the article and sort of end up in a black hole. So you have to maintain that article online with a clear indication why it was retracted. Not only naming and shaming, but also technical reasons. So this happened in the process of peer review, where the authors clearly violated the scientific trust and integrity of the authors and the community and of the reviewers. And review, basically, let me remind you, is the essential filter to separate science from speculation, and is an essential assessment of the quality of scientific articles and the validity of what we would eventually publish. Peer review has to be taken seriously, and not only authors are under pressure. In that same community, you're being invited as a reviewer, so the pressure for reviewers is also tremendous. How much time do you have left to review? Let me share with you again some survey results. This time we asked people, to what extent do you agree that do you agree or disagree that the following objectives should be the purpose of peer review? And those are given in the dark blue bars. And to what extent do you agree or disagree that peer review is currently able to actually live up to these expectations, the light blue bars? And again, no surprise, the vast majority responded that peer review should be able to enhance the quality of submitted manuscripts. 64% of that group, it's the second bar from the top, actually believes that it does live up to that. The differences are bigger, though, between the expectations and the actual perception of what peer review can do when it comes to the more ethical aspects of the peer review. 81% expects that peer review can detect plagiarism, though 38% believes that it actually does. And 79% of the respondents think that peer review should be able to detect fraud, but only 33% believes it actually does. We have a lot of work to do here as a community, as publishers, to see if we can live up to these expectations, to think of whether peer review should indeed be able to perform these services and meet these objectives. And in that sense, as a publisher, we're trying to help reviewers in this as well. These duties, again, may be quite obvious. Yet again, a lot of grey areas, again, referring to Steve's presentation about this. Oops, I'm losing my screen here, so I have to look a bit up where we are. This is an overview of the initiatives and pilots in which we try at Elsevier, but also other publishers are doing this, help the reviewers in performing their reviews, but also to make sure that they have the time to do so. And they vary from reusing reviewer reports. This can be done on a case-by-case basis only. You don't do this for certain fields. We're experimenting with it only. In what cases can we use reviews rendered for a certain journal for another journal as well? Tricky. It's a tricky question, but that doesn't mean that we shouldn't look into the possibilities. The same goes for projects on increasing the efficiency or speed of review. And an interesting one here is the second bullet point under point 2, whereby you don't send a manuscript to a reviewer asking him or her to review that article, but basically you have a pool of reviewers, which we've invited, to pick from a whole batch of abstracts that they think might be of interest to them. So not so much pushing the article to them, but making them pick, well, that looks interesting to me. I might be willing to review that. Again, that can raise some ethical concerns, but we have to experiment and continuously look into the ways we make the review system more transparent and more efficient. Transparency of peer review is another. issue that's continuously on our agenda, as are the projects to increase the chances of reviewers accepting. Again, it is a lot of work, and people are overly committed anyway. Like I said, editors are at the very core of this publishing cycle, from the beginning until the very end. Again, a listing of what their main duties, most commonly shared across websites and publishers' definitions entail. But here again, I want to emphasize that there are grey areas, not easily to be captured under one of those duties. One example is the referral or the reference of a manuscript submitted to another journal. Oops, I'm skipping here. By the way, these are sheer examples. I needed pictures, I needed some more color in my presentation, so this is just by means of example. But say a manuscript comes in for a certain journal, and at first glance the editor looks at it and thinks, wow, this is really poor quality. It doesn't meet the expectations of my journal. How ethical would it then be to refer the authors to a competing journal and say, you know what, you should go there? That would be really abusing the peer review system. It would, I mean, there's a lot of stress on that system already. However, it's not that clear. It can be of genuine editorial guidance. I know cases whereby editors, and luckily the vast majority of them think like this, they refer such an article because it does fit the aims and scope better of that other journal. That's a desk reject, so it doesn't enter the peer review, it's simply being referred to a more suitable journal. I think a couple of criteria to bear in mind there would be the aims and scope, the article type that the other journal publish, and also the quality. If you know beforehand that it is very poor quality, it doesn't have an abstract, an introduction, it doesn't have a conclusion, then it doesn't make sense to overload the reviewers with that material. It's a very difficult ethical balance that an editor has to bear in mind there that is not so easily to capture under the standard and obvious editorial duties, I would think. Another example of that is the questioning for citations to your own journal. And I think in 99% of the cases, and most of you will agree, that's not acceptable. I'm not sure under which duty this would fall, probably fair play, but this can be a grey area again. I know editors that genuinely ask for citations to competing journals. You've missed this citation in Nature, why didn't you bring it up? It's essential to your research, it's essential to the paper. If you can do that, then why couldn't you do this if it is really genuinely missing for your own journal? But be careful, asking for citations for your own journal is pretty close to impact factor engineering and not considered in general as very ethical behavior. Again, a grey area. Although I have to say that it also touches on a different aspect. Sometimes editors see papers where their journal is not being cited once. There's no reference made to that journal, and another journal comes up more and is really very dominant in the citation list. Then it really looks like it has been rejected for that journal and sent straight forward to the other journal for publication. That is possible, and this touches on, I think, also duty of the author. You always have to take reviewers' comments seriously. I don't think it is fair if reviewers put valuable time and effort in putting good comments about the article, to enhance the article, to simply ignore that and go on to the next journal. Take the comments of reviewers seriously. They are there to help you. And they're usually the more experienced people that are being invited anyway. Not everybody is well suited as a reviewer. You should have the quality and the promptness to do so. In this all, let me briefly remind you of the sheer existence of academic publishers. What are our main tasks in general? They are based, I would say, on these four pillars: registration to officially note who submitted scientific results first, certification, making sure that the validity is clear, that the quality of the article meets the standards of science and of that specific journal. Dissemination, make it as widely available as possible to the relevant audience, and then preserve it for eternity. And in one brief sentence, I would think that the publisher's duties, when it comes to the ethics around this, come down to supporting editors, reviewers, and authors along this whole cycle, and implementing best practices, as Mark has described earlier this morning. And basically, that concludes the publishing cycle. Thank you very much.